Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. If you've clicked on this video, you're probably wondering what is bright indirect light? Because we see it everywhere. We see it in a lot of houseplants. When you read the little label, when you go to buy something, it says it needs bright indirect light. And if you do even the smallest bit of research online, you'll get a whole different host of answers as to what bright indirect light might be. Now, I am not a light expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been doing my own research over the last 4 to 5 years in terms of how you can make that work within your environment without being a scientist. And for the people that have been here for a while, they know that I do have a bit of a science background. So I might be kind of peppering some of this video with some of that information. And also some of the things I might be suggesting on this might be for the slightly extra individuals that might want to go the extra mile to see about getting that right. And they want to kind of geek out a bit about this. But hopefully this might give you a better understanding by the end of it as to what bright indirect light is, how to utilize it to the best of your ability, essentially, to grow your plants in an optimal way, at least in terms of light. So I'm going to structure this video with a bit of background, the realities of what it might mean to actually try to figure out what bright indirect light is, checking things like readings for bright indirect light, using existing plants who have been successful with bright indirect light to lead you to something that could work for other plants, any gadgets and terminology that might help you with trying to kind of optimize your lighting environment for your plants, and I'll round up with some final thoughts. Diving into the first topic, which is background, in terms of that label that you might see in a plant, basically in a plant store, on the plant pots, might be a tag, it might be something that you're researching online, it might be people like me online on YouTube telling you that it likes bright indirect light. The background with this, and at least this is based on what I've been able to glean from my own personal research online, so again, pinch of salt is probably going to be needed here. I am not a scientist that specializes in this or that went into an awful lot of detail trying to do line testing. But that having been said, a lot of the times when you see bright indirect light on a lot of your plants, it kind of almost links into the old terminology, because a lot of the terminology that we see for most plants, not just for houseplants, are meant for plants that would be in somebody's garden. So what does this mean? So a lot of the time when you're seeing bright indirect light, what it might translate to is that plant needs bright indirect light if it was outside, which for the majority of the people, that's going to be tricky to replicate in your home environment, because guess what? A lot of people aren't fortunate like me that I have a conservatory where I get top-down lighting or lighting that comes all the way around the plants, basically. But at the same time, there's a reason why these plants are houseplants that we're talking about here, because the bright indirect light for them will be bright indirect light in terms of what it would be like in a jungle. So if you think about it in terms of a garden scenario, and this might help as well when you're thinking about maybe transitioning your plants out. I know, at least for the Northern Hemisphere, summer is unfortunately, or fortunately, considering that today is a heat wave here, coming to an end soon. It means that you probably won't be transitioning your plants out into the garden now. You might do if you're in the Southern Hemisphere soon. But yeah, essentially, knowing where to place your plants in the garden is also similar to knowing where to place your plants in home. So take a moment and step back and try to look at this in a more holistic view. Ignore everything about garden plants and about what it might be like out in the garden, and think about the natural habitats of these plants. So a lot of the times, the houseplants that we have are tropicals. So they're from tropical locations around the world, and they grow in very specific areas, and that's what makes them desirable as houseplants. And what I mean by this is a lot of the times, not all of them, a lot of at least the most common houseplants tend to be understory plants. And this is important. Why? Because these plants will be growing on the floor of the forest. Granted, some of them that climb will try to find a tree to then climb up epiphytically to move towards that light. And this also links into leaf size sizing up, because it makes sense. When they are smaller and they're down at ground level and they're trying to head towards the light, the leaves aren't getting that much light, so they can't photosynthesize, they can't be as large as it would like it to be. But the closer it gets to brighter light, the larger the leaves can get. Because obviously imagine it's moving closer to that kind of treetop, which means more light is coming through. And we'll talk about light density in just a moment. But essentially, you need to think about it in that way. And this is the reason why a lot of the common houseplants are houseplants, basically, because they are used to those highly shaded conditions. And by that, I mean in the forest. So they would work in a household environment where you wouldn't necessarily have a conservatory or a greenhouse so they can get light from above or all around. And it might just be a window somewhere. Now, the slight little side note on this is for the people that are getting into slightly rarer plants that have not been on the market for a long time, that have not had decades of scientists behind them trying to select for the hardiest plant. And I'm looking at things like the golden pothos, which has had decades to kind of be tweaked by human beings in terms of how they will cultivate it so that it is as hardy as it is. Don't get me wrong, I'm assuming the golden pothos or the Epipremnum aureum was always a bit of a hardy plant, essentially. But yeah, so it's not had that for the slightly rarer plants because they're just now coming into the market. Some of them, not all of them. And again, I've mentioned in previous videos that a lot of the plants that we think are rare and they're just coming into the market were in the market in the 70s as well. But they've not stayed around. They've not been as quintessentially there as the golden pothos, the Monstera deliciosa, the spider plant. These things have been around and they've kind of stuck around, basically, even when people really weren't into, when they kind of lost interest in tropical houseplants. So if you think about it in that respect, that's the light level that these plants are accustomed to getting. So you can kind of see what it is. It's bright because if you're seeing the leaves of these trees that are moving, probably in the wind or because of the rain, more light will filter down. Now, the thing to remember about that is, I mentioned just a moment ago that it could be quite dark in the forest floor, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. It's also about the visible light as well to us, because a certain area in your house that might be quite far back from the window, you're sitting there going, oh, even without lights on, this bit is really bright. But I will show you a way that you can test it out, and just so you can realize that actually that area probably isn't as bright as I thought it was. That's probably low light, which might essentially slowly kill off the plant. I usually trigger a few people by saying this. Low light for nearly all house plants, even the ones that are sold as low light loving. There's no plant that is low light loving. They are just slowly dying. But at a minimum, you want to give them medium light, basically. So with the bright indirect light, coming back into that, you need to remember that aspect. The only other thing to remember here is unless you are getting some of the rarer plants that might be coming from the tropics, and hopefully they are responsibly sourced and they are not poached, they are plants that are probably closer to what they're getting in nature because they're probably usually within the locations that they would grow naturally anyway. Plants that might be coming from nurseries, and I'm thinking the kind of two big ones, the two kind of big areas that I know that will produce in mass, basically, would be places like the Netherlands for Europe and Florida for the States. I know there's probably other places around the world, but these are the ones that I'm aware of. These people are growing these plants in artificial conditions. They're not necessarily where that plant would be endemic, which means it wouldn't grow there naturally. So you need to bear that in mind as well, because the light level that they've been getting since they were very young cuttings or possibly even seeds might be different from what it's getting from nature. This has hopefully not been too confusing at this point, but you just kind of need to have an awareness of both of these things, because a bit of a spoiler alert of what's coming in later on, you're going to need to experiment. So this will help you have that awareness when you're doing your experimentation. So that links in quite nicely to that reality aspect, basically. So bearing in mind that you need to know where that plant is coming from. Is it coming from a plant nursery that is not grown in a location of the world that is native to that plant? And also, is it coming from somewhere that it is native as well? The other thing that you need to remember, and this is something that we've had conversations in some of my other videos about, is that a lot of houseplants are actually almost considered weeds where they grow natively. And a few examples that I can think of this is the golden pothos, I am sure in its natural habitat is a weed. The ivy, so the Hedera helix, in the UK it's technically not a weed, but if you ask anybody from here, they would probably say that it is a weed. And the people that have been here for a while have known since I've moved into this house, the previous owner had ivy everywhere. It's been nearly 2 years, I'm still removing ivy. And the same thing goes for the Sephora prostrata, the little baby plants. I kind of posted about that a while back in my weird and unusual plants, and somebody from its natural habitat, which I think is New Zealand, was kind of saying, I was really surprised that this is being sold as a houseplant because over here it's considered a weed. So just bear that in mind, and especially for those types of houseplants, know that they're probably going to be a bit more resilient. So they are good ones to try out, basically. And that's the other part of the reality that I wanted to mention, is that this is something that if you're going to end up having a big collection, or even if you're going to have a few plants and you want to get it right, because again, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you might want to be extra. Experiment, but try experimenting both hopefully with an affordable plant that isn't as forgiving, and also with a plant that, again, inexpensive, that is forgiving. And by that I mean that the forgiving plant is probably going to be the one that is considered more of a weed in its local environment because it will be relatively tenacious. And the one that might be unforgiving might be plants that are grown in very specific parts of the world with very specific conditions. If you can get both happy, you've got the golden ticket. And this is the thing, this is why it's so tricky for people, and this is the part of the reality of it all. It's so tricky for people to give you a very specific set of information as to what bright indirect light might be. Because unfortunately, and this is probably not what you want to hear from this video, it's relevant to your environment, to the light level that you can give the plant, where the plant has come from, what the background of the plant has been, and also the availability of light. So that's the other bit that I kind of mentioned a bit earlier on. The availability of light, because people think about the brightness of light. The availability of light is something that you need to also consider in terms of how many hours of light. So the people that have got heavily into this and they're maybe growing with grow lights know this, because a lot of the things, when you start talking about things like grow lights, you are looking at active hours of light. And I'll give you a very specific example. I live in the UK, so a lot of the times in the winter, it's grey and miserable. 4 days. We're not talking about parts of the day. 4 days. That almost makes it a bit easier because I know that that light level that it's going to be getting is going to be consistent throughout the day, unless there's very heavy clouds and it's going to be raining solidly under very dense clouds. That might mean it's getting less light. But on average, kind of overcast summer day, for instance, what you might get, and you're thinking this plant is in the right place because it's got bright indirect light because you tested it when it was sunny. Always, always, always test out the lighting when it's overcast as well, and just be aware of that. I'm not saying you're going to be moving your plants every other day in order to make sure that they've got consistent bright indirect light. The only way you can realistically achieve that is by something like grow light, because it will give it the same level of light all day for however many hours you put it on. So that's the other thing that you might need to consider. If a plant wants bright indirect light but maybe burns a bit easily, give it slightly lower bright indirect levels, and we'll talk about levels in a minute, for a longer period of time. If a plant is okay, you might be able to bump up the levels but reduce the amount of hours that it's getting that bright indirect light. So that's why a lot of the times when you're thinking or when you're looking at conversations that are happening online about bright indirect light, they also talk about light availability and the density, because I'll give you again an example. If you've got a plant that is getting bright indirect light, like somewhere in a conservatory where it's getting top down all day, I almost need medium light at any given time in this conservatory because of the availability of light. A plant that might be in a north-facing window, at least for the southern hemisphere, which will get the least amount of light, probably will never truly achieve that bright indirect level of light because it's never getting that harshness of the sun for long enough. Certain other bits that you might be putting in, maybe if you're putting it in a west-facing window, is going to be something that is probably going to be getting bright indirect light for a decent chunk of the day when it's a bit cooler as well. Because one thing you also want to be aware of, and again, issues that I'm having in the conservatory, is bright indirect light for all hours of the day means that not only does it get an awful lot of light, but it also gets very, very hot. And I will tell you, I am currently sitting at 31 degrees Celsius in the heat wave in the UK, so great joy. But that is also something that you need to consider, is that availability of light. And that's the other reality is, yes, you're giving it the right light levels. Are you giving it the right light levels for enough of the day? So if your plant needs bright indirect light for, say, 12 to 14 hours of the day, and it's only getting it for 1 hour of the day, and you're sitting there going, why is it struggling? It's getting the right light. It's not getting it for long enough. So you just need to remember that as well. Now moving on to things like readings and checking readings. And again, I've mentioned this on previous videos, but I would highly recommend purchasing some technology. And I think I was going to have a different section for this. I might merge the two sections into one. So this will be checking readings and technology and maybe some terminology as well. So the thing that I would really like you to at least try to get on your phone, and it's free. I think there are free versions of this on both iOS and on Android, is download a light meter app on your phone. Now, before all the scientists come at me, it's not the same as a par meter reading, basically. And I think it's called a par meter reading. There is much more scientific instruments that are very, very sensitive, and they are used to understand light level, and par is photo available radiation, I think. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll put it up here. I've mentioned this on a few other videos and I still can't ever get it right. But that is how much of that light is available for the plant to photosynthesize. And a little bit of snippet of information here as well is, for the people that are into their grow lights, there's a lot of reasons why a lot of people, including myself, barring the fact that it's horrendous with the purpley pink light, of going for the full spectrum light, because yes, theoretically, most plants will not absorb anything other than blue and red light. Basically, and this makes sense. I don't know if anybody's done enough research on this on their own. I mean, there's been enough research on this. It's just like a plant is green, it leans towards yellow. So, and I'm not going to go into color theory either, but it can't absorb that as well. But there have been studies, I think a lot of them are already out there, that full spectrum light will generally be better if it can get the whole spectrum of light, not just those two colors. I know the pinkish purpley lights are generally a bit cheaper than the full spectrum lights. After years of experimenting and having the pinky purple, other than the fact that it gets very annoying, that light color, very quickly, wait and just pay a tiny bit more and just go for a full spectrum if you can. Trust me on this one. And if anybody disagrees with me in the comments, please do have that conversation down below. I think that is my opinion. I would think most people that have tried both would agree with me. I might be wrong. But yeah, so getting something like a light meter app on your phone would be good. As I mentioned, it's not going to be as accurate as those other more scientific machines. And guess what? Those scientific machines cost a lot of money and they are very difficult things to find. At least in the UK, it was a while back. And I'm just like, out of curiosity, let's see if I can find one on Amazon. I think there wasn't any, or maybe there was one, and it was an obscene price for something that I just wanted to take a couple of readings from. I mean, we're not doing this on a professional level. If you're doing this on a professional level, maybe invest in one of those. But do get something like a light meter app. And the way that most of these things will work, and unfortunately I can't show you me doing this because I am filming on my phone right now and it is on my phone. You would actually go to a plant and actually let me pick up a phone case. I know this might sound ridiculous, but I'll show you what you need to be doing. Okay, so assume that this is the phone. It's just a case from a very, very old phone, actually. But say this is the front of the phone. Normally it will use, not always, double check with your own app. Mine will usually use the front-facing camera, so the camera that you might be using for a selfie, not the back camera. But again, check it. You might even be able to trigger different settings for this. My one on standard will use the front-facing camera. So what you want to be doing is, say you've got the window here, direct that camera to look at that window so we can take that sensor reading. Ideally, you want to have the phone at the same level as the majority of the foliage of that plant might be, just so you can see what light levels it's getting. And this might be an interesting one for you to experiment with, because if you do it on an overcast day and you can slightly move your phone towards where the light is coming in when there's no clouds and to the other part where there is cloud, you might see a big difference. And I will say use something like a note. Note down that value. And then obviously on a fully overcast day, do the same reading and note down that value so you can see what the difference is between those two things. And trust me, it might surprise you. The other thing that I want you to do, if you can, even if you don't have a garden, you might be able to do it somewhere like a park, is take the same phone app, go outside on a fully sunny day and just point it up and see the reading that you might get there. Also, what you ideally want to be using, because most of these apps will not be accurate to that par value, which is the more scientific value. Try to avoid using lux. I think that's more to kind of, it's not the one that you want to be using. I don't want to also go down the route of lux because I'm not fully versed in what that's exactly used for. I want to say it's used more for artificial light, but I might be wrong. But use, if it does have, find an app that talks about foot candles. You might see it as FC. That's an old way of measuring light, but it's a slightly better, at least from what I've seen from my research, way of measuring it if you can't use par. So do that and have a look and compare the value that you've just seen from just being out when it's sunny to the light levels that you're getting in the house. But then I also want you to do one more thing. Go underneath a really shaded area where there's trees overhead and take that value standing up and then maybe crouch down all the way down to a level where a plant might be on the forest floor and see if there's a difference in the values. And this will give you a much better understanding of kind of light levels. Because what you think might be bright or might be low light might be the opposite of what you think as well. And I'll come back to a previous comment that I made. Take the same app with the light meter reading that will do the light meter reading and take it to that area of your house where you think it's getting even low light. And if it's anything under 3 digits for the foot candles at least, it really isn't getting very much light at all, and most plants will die a miserable death there, basically. So just bear that in mind. That might open up your eyes, and that's what I was talking about, visible light before. What we might see is an area that's relatively bright. Actually, in terms of the availability of light towards that plant, it might be quite low. So always a good thing to remember that. So moving on to using existing success, and this is roughly how you can hack the system ever so slightly. So if you've got a plant that you know needs bright indirect light and you've got it in a position where it's getting what you assume is the right light levels because it is loving life, take a meter reading. Because what you're then going to be trying to achieve is replicate as close as possible that meter reading anywhere else that you want to place a plant that needs to have bright indirect light. So you see where it's going here? You can kind of use something that you've already had success with and get the number value of kind of how much light it's actually getting and utilize it to replicate that situation. Obviously, at this situation, remember what we were talking about a moment ago, the availability of light. So it's not just that it's getting the right number of foot candles. By right, I mean the one that works for the other plants, but it's also getting it for long enough. A deeper layer of this as well, and I did mention at the beginning of this video, this might be for the people that are a bit extra. Apologies if you're not, but you can take different levels of how much you want to like geek out on this, essentially. But what you can also do is, when we were talking about the forgiving plant and the unforgiving plant, do it with both, basically, because what you might then realize is a plant that is forgiving and needs bright indirect light is getting one value, and one that isn't forgiving but is maybe a bit more successful in your space is getting a different value. It's a good idea to have both of those. Again, because we're talking about if things have come closer to where the natural habitat is, or things that have been grown artificially, because the artificial ones might be getting more light than the ones that are getting closer to the native habitats. So just bear that in mind. It's just a layer of information that you just need to keep at the back of your mind, and you will eventually do this kind of automatically. That is the big thing. Use success that you've already had with your plants. And if you haven't yet, if you're just starting off on your journey and you've landed on this video, I'm really, truly sorry, because it may be a bit much. But one of the things that you can take away from this is, if you don't have success yet with some of your own plants and you're worried that it might be the light level, find a friend or a family member that does have success with their plants. And guess what? The app is on your phone. Your light meter app is on your phone. Ask them nicely and do get permission to take a meter reading from some of their plants that you know are meant to be in bright indirect light, that are doing well, and use that. And if you don't have anybody who's really into plants in your kind of vicinity, if you go to a decent houseplant store or a plant store generally, and again, ask permission, most of them should be okay if you explain what you're trying to do. Basically, they might look at you a bit weirdly, but if your plant survives, do you care if people look at you a bit weirdly? I'm over people look at me weirdly because I'm into plants. It's fine, I'm judged on a regular basis by close friends and family as well. But do see if you can get that reading as well, because it will help you in the long run, because you don't then need to sit there and figure out, did it come from here or did it do this? As long as you're aware of it, replicate something that works. I hesitate to call this a hack, but like, if it works, keep doing it. Or just repeat it, essentially. But just the things to remember is obviously where it's come from and the light availability. How many hours is it getting that light, and how many hours might it be kind of a bit more shaded? So to wrap this up, which is, I'm looking at it already, it's a bit of a long video. Apologies. Things to remember, and this might be one for both the people that have been into this and they're really into this, and the people that are just starting off. The people that are just starting off, if you take nothing away from this video, take the fact that I'm saying download a free light meter app, take the reading the way that I've described, and try to replicate that number for your other plants. It is as simple as that. For everybody else that really wants to geek into it, you need to be looking at it on a more holistic level. And by the way, the same thing I was talking about, the meter readings, you can do this with your artificial grow lights, so your LED grow lights. If you know that one plant or some plants are doing really well under your LED grow lights, measure it. Measure what light they are getting. Don't sit there and look at the dials or the figures on the machine itself. Measure the light that these plants are getting and see if you can replicate it anywhere else. Simple as this. It literally is replicate things that are working. And the thing that you also need to remember is, again, that layer of how many hours of light availability is it getting and where has it probably come from. You might not always be able to definitely say, oh, this has come from its natural habitat or this has come from its grower. Generally speaking, if you're getting a relatively common houseplant that comes out in thousands in stores, it's probably been grown in a nursery somewhere rather than a smaller, more local grower, basically, if that makes sense. But yeah, hopefully that has cleared up what bright indirect light is. It is as clear as mud, which is shocking considering that we're talking about light or light levels. But using a few tips and tricks, because people are always sitting there going, how do you get your plants as big as you are? Is because I have learned, and I'm using this technique all the time with some of my plants, especially when I bring something new in, to kind of judge where I will put it in. And by the way, this will apply to medium or even low light. If you see, and I'll use a usual plant that people will have as a low light plant, which is the ZZ plant, so the Zamioculca zamifolia. That's meant to be a low light plant. I have also grown it in medium and bright indirect light, and it's done really, really well in those conditions. But if you really want to replicate it and you're worried that it might be slowly killing off your plant, find somebody that's been growing it successfully for a while, take a meter reading, see there. Same thing goes for medium light plants. If you've got a plant that's doing well and you think it's getting medium light and it needs medium light, take that reading and replicate it for any other plant that needs medium light. I think I have probably rattled on for way too long for this one, but hopefully you've enjoyed geeking out with me, essentially. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.